This is the Troutbitten podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout.
This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten podcast, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Dominic Swantowski, the owner of Troutbitten and the author of troutbitten.com. My friends are here with me to talk about hatches and strategies. That's our topic for episode 3 of season 3. So I think one of the greatest attractions to fly fishing can also present one of the biggest barriers. It's the bugs. The aquatic insects that make up the bulk of the trout's food base are intriguing, but they're also kind of mysterious, especially at first. The hatch charts, the life cycles, and the various behaviors of mayflies, caddisflies, stoneflies, and midges come to the angler in a complex web of overlapping information that takes seasons, or perhaps a lifetime really, to process. And then there's the crustaceans like crest bugs and scuds, and even terrestrial insects at various times of the year. All of these bugs, and understanding how to imitate them with a fly is perplexing for every new angler and every experienced angler. And the truth is, many lifelong fishermen never take the time to learn much about the insects that trout eat. But that's all right, because here's the thing. You don't have to, necessarily. Many times, the specifics of the hatching bugs don't even matter that much. Hatch matching seems synonymous with fly fishing for trout. And for decades, the focus on fooling fish was more fly-centric in this industry than anything else. What fly should I use? That was always the question. And it makes sense, because changing patterns is probably the easiest solution when trout won't eat your fly. And in some cases, getting just the right fly in front of the trout in just the right way really does make the difference. So fly selection matters, but here it is again. You don't have to match the hatch. Not precisely anyway. Not usually. You can have a wildly successful fishing season without knowing Latin names or the genus of any mayfly species, I promise. And you could probably have a great season by ignoring the specifics of hatches altogether too. My point is, wonderful fishing can be had without knowing much about the hatches that we'll focus on tonight. Really, don't let the complexities of trout bugs stand in the way of going out there and enjoying a good day on the water. Now, with that said, there's no denying that a fundamental understanding of what trout eat, both underneath and on top of the water, absolutely helps catch more trout. After all, our goal is to get a trout to eat the fly, right? So knowing about trout foods only makes sense. Positive results are sure to follow. The advanced angler explores the nuances of these bugs. Some insects are good swimmers and emerge fast. So a presentation outside of a pure dead drifted nymph might be the trigger that turns trout on. And likewise, understanding the life cycle of a mayfly helps us realize why seeking out and imitating the spinner stage is one of the best dry fly opportunities on the river. These are the kind of things to know about trout bugs. This is why we follow the hatches. We pay attention and try to meet the trout on their own terms, give them more of what they're eating right now. Understanding everything we can about these bugs and how trout respond to them is a big piece of the puzzle that we're trying to solve out there every day. And sometimes it's the keystone, because at certain times, the bug life of a river is the central player in a trout's daily life. All right, before we jump into our topic, let's say hi to my friends and answer a couple of questions from listeners too. I'm joined tonight by 5 excellent anglers, beer drinkers, and bullshitters. Josh Darling, Trevor Smith, Bill Dell, Austin Dando, and Matt Grobe. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
I'm last again.
You know.
Happy to be here.
What's the matter?
Last again. It's going to start to mean something.
Oh, yeah.
I'm feeling it.
The order of importance.
Well, guys, what's the biggest trout you saw this week? How about the rarest fish that you saw this week? Doesn't have to be big. Anybody?
I got a Arctic grayling, which...
Matt? You got a grayling in Montana?
Oh.
Yeah.
Are there a lot over there? I didn't know
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah, there's starting to be, they're trying to revive the species. And so they're doing some like reclamation stuff on some of the tribs that dump into some of the waterways. And so occasionally over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been surprised this time of year, especially like this is when I feel like I catch them. But it's always a welcome change up.
So are those stalkers or are those wild?
Stalkers, I bet.
Good question.
It's hard to say. I mean, because of the reclamation stuff, yeah, they've stocked them and I'm guessing they're stocked fish in my neck of the woods. There's plenty of wild ones in the state, but yeah, they're trying to bring it back. And so I think I got some stockies, but it's a good sign.
Nice.
That's neat. Did you hold one up and then, lift that fin, that back fin up? You have to do that, right?
Did you give it the grobe? Did you grobe it?
That's your thing. You have to grobe.
Did you wedge it in the camera?
No, I was feeling bad about myself ever since I said that on the podcast. Yeah, I don't. I kind of just kept it wet and let it go.
We'll help you with that.
All right. Hey, guys, I keep getting questions from listeners in my inbox. That's a good thing. Thanks, everybody out there, for sending in questions. Sometimes I get the same question a couple times within a week, and that's cool. And I often will pick that question. And here we go. This is from Ross Rooker through email. Austin, you want to read this one?
Yeah, sure. All right. So the question is, hi, Dominic. I've been reading your posts for about a year now. I'm really enjoying the podcast. Thanks for what you do. It definitely has made my fishing better and more enjoyable. And it sometimes starts a larger discussion on tactics with my two closest fishing friends, my dad and my wife. It has brought us all closer together with a shared passion. I have a question for you and your friends. I've recently been hearing some prominent anglers promoting a limit on the number of fish we catch and release to help conserve fish populations. They tend to cite fish mortality studies that put catch and release mortality somewhere around the 10% or more mark. Like you and your friends, I like to fight fish quickly, land them in a net, keep them wet, let them go as quickly as possible. But I also like to catch a lot of fish. As tactics improve, success is measured by numbers of fish to the net. Is this unsustainable? That's a fair question. What do we got, guys?
This is tough.
Right.
I guess show me a scientific study that has that, or I guess for as much as all of us fish, how often do you see a dead fish along a bank?
Really rarely.
I get it that there's animals and stuff around that could easily clean them up the night after or whatever, but
Yeah, I think this 10% of fish caught, released, mortality, I think it's nonsense. The trouble with a lot of fishing studies is they're not well funded. I don't think they have enough money to do a deep enough study. And maybe one study showed that 10%. I can almost guarantee, I'll guarantee it. I don't kill 10% of the fish that I release. I'm positive you guys don't either.
That's a good point. I think that if it is true, if 10% is true, then it's probably not the people who are, I think the people who are catching a lot of fish are the people who care enough about it to probably have good release practices.
Nice.
Perfect.
that's a very good point.
In medicine, anytime we read a study that we're supposed to apply to our particular patients, we always ask the question, is this data set transferable to the particular patients that I'm interacting on a daily basis? And I think from my understanding, and I will look into this a little bit more, but I'm pretty sure that this was not a study that was done on wild trout, and not necessarily a study that was done like with barbless hooks, and not necessarily a study, so as you start to tick down the boxes of how many items we have in common with the study that was done, probably the data set becomes less and less transferable.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, that's good stuff. There was an interesting article that came out in the Helena newspaper this week on the Missouri.
Okay.
And the Missouri, they shocked more fish than they have since like 2012. It was the second most fish they've ever got on record, which was equivalent to about 7,000 fish per mile. And it coincides with the second busiest river in the state of Montana. So it just...
And there you go.
I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? It's the second busiest river, most fish.
So that coincides completely with PA Fish Commission's shocking surveys. Our catch and release waters just continue to have more and more trout. And yet, they continue to have more and more anglers. So where's the problem?
Right.
I don't get it.
You could probably...
I really don't get it.
You could probably play devil's advocate too and say what fish do perish from that hooking, maybe the weaker in the genetic pool, that you're allowing healthier fish to survive. that you're giving more habitat availability to the surviving fish. You could probably take this argument in a number of different ways, but none of us have population issues on these waterways that we're fishing.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I don't think that like the kind of people that are worrying about this or mentioning this are the people that are actually catching 50 fish. I hear it from people who aren't catching 50 fish. And they seem to kind of assume that large groups of anglers are out there just racking up ridiculous fish counts every trip. And if that's what you think, like then maybe get off the internet and away from social media for a while.
Right. It's only
I think
Bill.
you're being right. No, I think you're being influenced in a very unusual way. Nobody's out there doing that. Nobody's pounding 50 fish in a day, especially wild trout. And you're not. They're not bluegill. You know what I mean?
The other thing that's hard about this is, and we've mentioned in past episode, no one fishes as much as they'd like to. So let's say you haven't been fishing in 3 weeks and you finally get to go. You're not going to be thinking about, I can only catch 5 fish today and then I get to go home.
Oh, thank you.
You know?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
No one's going to do that.
Right. That's awesome. Awesome. I think it's a dangerous message to start telling people, oh, hey, don't worry about if you catch fish. It's just the experience. Now, we acknowledge over and over and over in these podcasts because to our hearts, each and every one of us loves everything about fly fishing, that experiential side. But we are there, and what keeps us in the game for a lifetime is catching fish. It's that puzzle. It's that mystery. And here's the thing. What we need is more conservationists. We need people who love the rivers and love trout fishing, everything about it. And frankly, I think this message that you're catching and releasing too many fish, you're going to hurt them, is a dangerous one. Because the next logical step, if you think about it, is, hey, maybe you shouldn't be fishing at all. And that is the kind of message that provides fuel for organizations like PETA. So people promoting this are on a slippery slope. So the question is catch and release fishing unsustainable? No, it's sustainable. It's okay. You even have the stats there with the shocking surveys to back it up. And like Josh said, it's the people who can go out there and catch 50 fish on a really good day, they know how to take care of the fish. You earn that. And you know what? They're probably going to move away from whatever tactic is catching you 50 fish, because honestly, that can get kind of boring. And you're going to try to mix it up.
Good question.
I think it's worth saying too, and this is obvious, right? That there is a time when water temperatures hit a certain, and you guys, we spoke in depth about it, that might not be the time for everybody to be out there trying to catch 50 fish, right? Because then the mortality could be an issue.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Great point.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And like we always have to say, there are nuances to all of this,
Yeah.
And over freshly stocked fish, if these are stocked fish, Joey and I were fishing for stocked fish yesterday. It was not hard to catch them. It was day 2 of opening season here, and we may have been able to stand at one of the bridge holes and bang 50 fish.
Yeah.
I don't know, but we didn't want to, I just don't want to be discouraging people to catch fish. Right. It's catching fish that gets people involved in this sport and gets them, again, coming back and excited about fishing again. And it's those fishermen who help us to conserve and improve everything about our rivers.
Right on.
I don't want to lose anglers.
Yeah.
Tactical Fly Fisher was started in 2015 by Fly Fishing Team USA angler Devin Olson, with a mission to bring American anglers the techniques and gear that dominate the international competitive fly fishing scene. While you may have no desire to compete, you can still benefit from the same strategies which competitive anglers use to make them more successful on the water. Whether you want to buy a Euro-nymphing rod, a stillwater fly line, or just some hooks and beads to fill your fly box, we've got you covered. And our teaching materials will help you learn how to use whatever products fill up your cart. Head on over to thetacticalflyfisher.com and use the code TFF10 to get 10% off flies, fly tying supplies, or terminal tackle.
Water is essential for life, but for Orvis, it's the blood of the brand. Orvis has been the leader in fly fishing since 1856. No other brand can match the explorative and innovative spirit they bring to the water today. Everything at Orvis is about inspiring and empowering adventure and wonder in nature. Rooted in the vitality of fly fishing, fueled by passion and curiosity for the outdoors, Orvis designs and develops products and experiences, providing the knowledge and expertise to enable more meaningful moments and connections in nature. With over a century and a half of experience in the field and on the water, Orvis seeks to ignite that passion in others. All right, guys, that's good stuff. Let's get to the topic at hand. Let's dig into the hatches and the strategies. All right, so books and articles and videos, online debates, like there's an encyclopedia of knowledge surrounding trout stream insects. And we'd be foolish to try to tackle all of that in this hour-long podcast. So this is not the place to learn the full life cycle of these insects or the intricacies of their behaviors. Instead, let's focus on the overall strategies for fishing the hatches. Let's highlight what each of us here considers the most important facts about these bugs. And let's talk about how their emergence affects our tactics and our plans, how the behaviors of these bugs changes the trout's response, and how we take advantage of those facts to put more fish in the net. Sound good?
Yep.
All right, so I think the best way to approach things is to just walk through our season of bugs on the water. The timing of hatches is different across the country. Of course, we acknowledge that. And across the world. So too, the presence or abundance of specific insects is different in each region, or even just 10 miles down the road on the next creek. But I know that much of what we'll talk about here applies to most of the trout waters in the world, with different timing or perhaps adjusted applications, right? Here in Pennsylvania, our first major hatch that trout really respond to is the blue-winged olive in March. And then all the way into November, after dozens of other species have hatched through spring, summer, and fall, the last major hatch we have is the olive. So let's start with the blue-winged olive. I have a special place in my heart for the olive. Let's start there. Once the olives start, what's your strategy, guys? How does it affect the way that you fish? How does it change what you've been doing all winter long, and now the olives are there?
This is just a testament to the fact that being out on the water means a whole lot more than doing a bunch of research and doing too much planning. Because if you look at most hatch charts, they're not going to say that the blue wings olive start until May or June.
Oh my.
If you look at them, that's what they say usually, is what I found. But if you're out there, you see them starting in March. I mean, sometimes late February.
Yeah, for sure. That's how it was this year. Also, what a lot of hatch charts for around here will show is the little black stonefly. I pretty much ignore that one because the trout seem to ignore it. For me, am I missing that? Or are we going to start with the olive?
The little black stonefly is definitely there, but it's like it's the first thing the fisherman sees that gets him excited. I feel like, and it doesn't get the fish excited.
No.
Yeah.
At least on top.
Right on.
So I've had some epic days on the little black stonefly back home.
There it is. That's why you're here.
I mean, back home,
Lies. All lies.
On some of the delayed harvest waters in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a go-to hatch that is earlier than the olives, and I've had some wonderful fishing on stock trout waters with that bug. So like you were saying, Noam, there's regional stuff, and that part of the state definitely gets a strong hatch early season that's worth fishing.
So is that up top or underneath your success? I mean, Matt.
Up top, yeah. If the water's right, that that plays into so much, right? If the water is right, and we all know how hard it is to hit that water that's conducive to fish looking up in that early season window. But when it lines up, you can have some really good early season action on that little black stonefly and some of the southwestern freestoners, southwestern PA freestoners.
That's like a 16 or a 14, right?
Yep.
Anybody else on the little black stone, or can we finally talk about the olives? I get excited.
Get to what's important.
I will say, I think Matt brought up a great point, which I think applies to kind of all hatches, is if you don't hit the right weather conditions or stream levels, hatches don't mean anything.
Yeah, Bill.
To an extent, as far as like dry fly action, because if it's super bright and sunny, fish aren't going to look into the sun and eat that little black stonefly or a sulfur or a caddis most days. And the same thing if it's, if a river averages 100 CFS and it's at 1,000 CFS, the fish isn't going to work that hard to get through that current, all that current to get to the top to eat that fly.
All the way to the top, right?
Yeah.
But they might eat the nymphs underneath, right? And we all kind of pay attention, no matter what hatch we're about to talk about, no matter what bug we address. I think we all imitate these bugs underneath, right? And like you're saying, Bill, they very well might not come up to the top. We're ready for it. I know I'm ready for it and hoping for it because I love fishing dry. But yeah, good point, dude. I mean, you can't expect the trout to do too much. They're efficient.
I think one of my favorite things about the olive hatch is the beginning or the advent of trout kind of looking for insects doing things and being able to drift in ways other than just trying to get the most pure bottom of the river dead drift. Through the wintertime, you just get so locked into, all right, the purest dead drift I can get. I'm going to get it as low as I can. Yeah. My tag is going to be 12 inches above my mayfly. I'm trying to put both near the bottom. And as it gets to the blue-winged olive, I start spacing out my tag a little bit. I start swinging my drift out. Just like all this motion sort of comes into the world, and the trout seem to be back in three-dimensional, behavior. And so it's just exciting.
That's a neat way of saying it.
Good way to put it.
Yeah.
When I lived up in State College, my strategy was always to show up, late morning, 10:30, 11, and kind of get into the section of water that I wanted to fish, because I mean, we went from a deep dark winter of nymphing, tight line tactics, bobbers, and then all of a sudden those fish, I mean, is there a better hatch that gets those fish to the surface than the spring olive hatch? I mean, it's pretty special.
Right. There's almost no better opportunity. Year after year, I find, let's say, the most gullible fish on that early olive hatch. And I love it. I have so many great memories on all of our rivers. I could point to them, and every time I walk past them, I think about, I had that day where it was snowing. Yeah. There's snowflakes in the air and there's blue olives in the air. And then I get, I get these opportunities to fish over these trout that just seem so excited, and they are forgiving on a very small bug. The only difficult part maybe is that they're small. They're like 18s, but that's okay. Yeah. Sure. What surprises me is how forgiving they will be, especially early in the season, about the drift. Whether it's perfect, it's just starting to drag and fish still eats it. I go, wow, that's nice.
Do you think it's because it's been 3 months since they've started to eat flies on top, and they haven't had, let's say winter is a less pressured season for the most part, and so they're not tippet shy, they're uneducated, and they're hungry.
They're having fun. They're like dolphins.
I seriously think it's fun almost plays into it.
There's probably a good chance that in a lot of cases they're seeing it for the first time too.
Right. Somebody early, or the youngest trout. Yeah. Like you said, Bill, all they've done is eat up top is eat midges, and I just think they follow them to up through the water column, and they're excited about it.
How much does the ideal water temperature play into it? At that time you have ideal water temps, and then the flow, and you don't have the pressure, and it's like everything lines up. Does all that contribute to the success we have with that hatch?
So I think the water temperature does play a big role in it.
Yeah.
Like 2 weeks ago, it was doing this thing you were talking about. It was snowing. It was one of the best hatches I've seen. It was blanket. Every little back eddy was full of olives. Nice. The fish were just like, nah, it's too cold. Ain't going up that high. This time of year, I feel like I haven't fished dries. I've nymph fished all winter, and I really want to catch some fish on dries. And so I'd go to I went to a pool, waited about 10 or 15 minutes, and they just would not rise. And the bugs were coming off. It was like a blanket hatch for like an hour, and they were just not interested. And I think it was water temp, if I were to guess, because air temps were in the 50s, and the next day they were in the 20s.
I've seen that a lot lately, Bill. I mean, the olives have been on almost every day for 5 or 6 weeks, and many days the trout just won't eat, and I'm out there most days. Most people will tell you, hey, when you get the drizzly, the cloudy days, those are your olive days. Now what I find is that they hatch almost every day, but they seem to be more available to the trout, or the trout respond to them more on those cloudy days, You kind of addressed all that with the sun. Maybe it's that. I've also heard theory that the olives get to the top and they dry their wings really quickly on those sunny and especially a little bit breezy days. The wings dry real quick, boom, they lift off.
Yeah.
And they're a small bug. I don't know, but maybe their wings dry faster somehow.
I would say that's true for any hatch.
Go ahead.
The idea that the oils and the liquids in their wings are trying to dry out, I think that's true for any hatch we experience here.
That's nice.
So,
Yeah.
But it could also be the case that we notice the excitement on the blue-winged olive because that might be the case, that they do dry a little bit faster. And as a result, the fish get used to reacting a little bit faster and with a little bit less apprehension than other hatches.
So what about blue quills and quill gordons? You guys make much distinction there besides the size? I find them both to be a little bigger. But do you fish them differently? Do you find different response?
And do you guys tie patterns for every single one of them?
Right. Yeah.
I don't. No.
Me neither.
I'm far more imitative than I am like an exact matcher. The silhouette, general body color, and we can get into this a little bit more maybe, but it takes a lot for me to commit to fishing dries, and I think and I want to have the opportunities to fish dries, but because I'm rarely going out with the sole purpose of fishing dry flies, I want to see some commitment on behalf of the fish before I'm going to go there. So when I do switch over to dries, I do have a couple patterns that I tend to gravitate towards. Do you guys have patterns that are, or like at least styles of patterns that you tend to gravitate towards if you're going to fish on top?
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're going to find as we rifle through some of these insects, they carry over. For me, I don't have, I really don't have just a blue-wing olive imitation. I use a clink hammer, I use a puffy, and I use a parachute olive, whatever. A few styles, right? And a comparadon. Okay, now all of a sudden I'm up to 4.
Yeah.
I got one pattern. I fish a comparadon and I tie it in every other size. So if I'll tie a comparadon
starting at 8.
Yeah, size 8.
Starting at 8.
That's the only size I've seen the fish.
They'll eat it. I will make them eat it.
Just makes them angry. Yep.
I mean, if you were a fish and there was a size 18 blue-wing olive coming down the river and there was a size 8 comparadon, wouldn't you be like, it's just like, hey, do you want a chicken nugget or do you want a steak?
No, I don't know.
You sound like a streamer guy.
Yeah, if it only was like that, that'd be great. Just give them the biggest thing you can find. And they go, oh, I'm going to eat that. That reminds me of the cicadas. When the cicadas came, they had to be on the water for about at least a week. I'm going to say almost 2 weeks before the trout really started going, all right, I guess we can eat those. They hadn't seen anything that big for 17 years around here.
As far like the blue quill and the quill gordon and the blue-wing olive, for the most part, I fish a comparadon and I tie like every other size. So I'll tie a 16, an 18, a 20. Like most times I tie an 18 because it's kind of in the middle of the...
Yeah, sure.
Just fishing a simple comparadon.
So Trevor's saying he's mostly a generalist, and I know I am, and you're saying that. I also fish a CDC and elk and an ex-Caddis. Let's talk about that. I mean, I fish those two as soon as the granome comes. For us, the granome is the first major Caddis hatch. Coincidentally, today I saw the first real emergence of the granome on one of our favorite rivers as I was guiding, and I went, oh, forget about the blue wings, guys. Here we go.
Yeah, this is good stuff.
Yeah, and there were some splashy risers. What do you guys do different? How does it change your game? What's your approach when you start to see granomes? What do you expect?
The granome hatch makes me think of the lead wing coachman wet fly.
Nice.
When I first started fly fishing, that was one of the first hatches I hit that I found that pattern to be super successful in catching fish.
Nice.
I feel like any caddis hatch that you hit, you don't have to have the most perfect drift because the flies are kind of just emerging. They're dancing on the water. You don't need a pristine drift to attract the fish. I think caddis hatches are always kind of my favorite because nothing has to be exactly perfect because they don't follow the rules like the sailboats do with the mayflies.
The mayfly sailboats.
Granome hatch historically for me is always the most disappointing hatch.
Really?
Because
on top, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. For on dry fly action, the owls come off and you start to see rises and it's great. And then you get into the thick granome hatch where you see them line the banks, line the logs on rocks, and you're thinking, oh man, any second now it's about to go nuts.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
So true.
So it's a tease for the dry fly angler.
Austin, I've been there and had those struggles a lot with that hatch, and I find showing up before the bugs get active and a large emergence, there's a small window there to kind of pickpocket some fish before there's too many naturals.
Nice.
And I found that to be, a feed window on those bugs that can be productive, if you're having issues with all the naturals.
Yeah, nymphing them underneath before you're saying they get up to the surface too much.
Yeah, that, and you guys have seen it, right? There's always those first heads. A lot of people want to say it's the small fish that first come up and will start eating. Mm-hmm. But having said that, if your goal is to fish that elk hair on top, there's that window, right before things get real crazy and there's a lot of naturals on the water that you can, if you move and look for those splashy rises, you can have some success.
Nice. Great point.
So I'm kind of with Austin on being disappointed by the granum a lot of times.
I love that hatch.
Well, no. Again, I'm just talking on top.
Shut up, Bill.
Come on, Bill. Hey, guy.
Doing it wrong.
No, really, guiding through the years, people will say, there's flies everywhere in the air. There's flies everywhere. And no fish are rising. Right. And you see a couple one-timers, they come up one.
Yeah, one-timer,
And I'll say, but, underneath, hey, let's do these things underneath. I think we're going to find this with a lot of caddis as we talk through. For me, I don't often around here get a lot of just real predictable, let's say, dry fly action on top. Now, I think when you get enough caddis on the water, we recognize that plenty of them get stuck in their shucks. As I read it, as I understand it, caddis get stuck coming out of their shuck a lot more often than the mayflies do. Mm-hmm. And so the caddis, let's call them cripples or emergers, they're trying to come out. They look available to the trout because they are stuck, and the trout will take advantage of that opportunity. Also, caddis go to the bankside, but then they come back and they'll dap to drink. Many species of caddis will dap and get a drink. And that's how they'll live for a couple days too. And so when they get a drink, and you've seen them bouncing up and down sometimes, you have to assume that some of them kind of, whoops, I got stuck in the water. They're available again. And then after they mate, we understand that the females, many of them, come and dap and actually slam their body against the water surface to dislodge those eggs. Now, some of those females actually dive to the bottom and lay those eggs. But those ones that are bam, bam, we've seen it. It looks like they're hopping, but they're slamming their body against the water. Again, they're going to get trapped in the surface, and there's like a third opportunity, to be trapped in the surface. I go back to, for me, that CDC and elk, or a puffy, or an ex-caddis, something like that, where the body's sitting flush, and you have maybe the things that look leggy, or oops, I got stuck in the water. And there you go. Those are my favorite caddis imitations, and I don't care if it's the granum or a tan caddis or something that hatches in the fall. For me, my strategy is almost always the same with those caddis hatches.
Yeah. There's a lot of times throughout the year that I don't do very well with like cased caddis patterns, but early in the year when you see those granums and sometimes olive caddises start, I have a lot more luck in that 2-month period with cased caddis patterns than I would generally any other time. And even because I think that they are, sometimes trout are keying on the pupa version of those flies because it's so much easier. I think that's why a fly works a lot better in those 2-3 months or so. Yeah.
I don't know if I've been lucky, but some of the rivers I fish have heavy caddis hatches. And I feel like there are certain times of the year where I feel like they're almost clockwork, where you can plan your day around, okay, I'm going to nymph fish, and then I want to be in a skinny riffle by X time. And if I can be in that skinny riffle by X time, and I know it's just gonna, for an hour, I can sit there and dry fly, like I can fish dry dropper, and that's absolutely my favorite way to fish for caddis with a dry dropper. Like you're fishing an elk hair caddis in, I don't know, 16 to 12, whatever it takes, and then I often fish like a hare's ear
underneath
as my dropper fly,
right?
Whether it be a dark one, a light one, somewhere in that range, and it just seems to do well. Or like I said, like a lead wing coachman during the granum hatch.
Yeah. And again, now that you have your dropper, you don't have to get deep, and when you have these emergencies of all these insects we're talking about, that's the point. Now they're coming up through the water column. So great, here come the fish. It's kind of fun. Well, it's a lot of fun. Like you said, Bill, a dry dropper is a great way to approach it. Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code Troutbitten10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure. This episode is supported by Freestone Coffee. You'll love sipping on it, guaranteed. Freestone Coffee is wildly delicious and dedicated to the sport of fly fishing. All Freestone Coffee is fresh roasted for your order, and 5% of proceeds go back to conserving the streams we love to fish. Freestone is just getting started, and they love your support. Head over to freestonecoffee.com and use code Troutbitten for 15% off your order. That's code Troutbitten for 15% off your Freestone Coffee order. Love it or your money back.
So for strategy then, Bill or Dom, you could answer this. Dom, you mentioned that you don't have to go very deep any longer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's a good expected depth to maybe catch fish coming up on emerging insects that you could have off a tag or your dropper?
For me, I feel like the shorter the dropper, the better the contact. I like it close for the contact. I feel like when I fish Caddis, I'm fishing it in water that's less than 2 feet deep. And so to put like a 3-foot dropper on there, I'm going to get out of contact, and I have a less chance of detecting the strike of something taking the dropper.
Nice. So, Austin, I still meet a lot of these hatches, whether they be Caddis or mayfly, with a nymphing presentation. And I will often go ahead and get one nymph low, and maybe that does match the granome. Maybe it's, maybe it's a stonefly. I don't care. Maybe it's just a waltz worm or general. Okay. But then, well, like Trevor said earlier, I'm going to make sure I have my tag higher up. Instead of trying to ride both flies low like I do in the winter, now I'm going to try to ride that tag like mid-column. I might go 24, even 30 inches up. Totally depends on the water.
Yeah.
I'll start to, I love that 3-dimensional idea. Like you said, Trevor, that's fantastic. Yeah. Now, all of a sudden, because of these hatches, many dimensions of our water are opened up. It's not just low. So not just how we approach it with a dry fly and then a dry dropper. I love that, Bill. Great point. I don't like a lot of slop there either. But just in my nymphing presentation, that will change. If I don't see risers, I might see a lot of bugs, not see risers. And so I'm probably not going to fish on top.
Yeah, great answers. I'm glad you both covered two sides of that.
What about the Hendricksons, guys?
I will say with that hatch, from my experience, from a strategy, that's the first time of the year where I truly see big mature fish starting to eat on the surface. And so I may actually walk a little more and do some stalking on rise forms for the first time of the year from a strategy standpoint if I'm looking to catch bigger fish.
No, I'm with you on that. And that's exciting. You start to really see them.
When you're saying you're stalking the bigger fish, let's say you're working a pool. Are you walking around that pool or, covering a couple 100 yards of water looking for the big head?
Yeah, so the strategy would be, if I'm looking for big fish, right, just kind of like a goal of mine to catch a 18 plus inch fish on a dry fly, knowing that some of those fish we've all experienced it, right? You have pods of fish, there's 3 to 4 in a glide, and you catch the first one that's 12 inches and blow the hole up. If I take a deep breath and try to analyze those heads, I'll specifically target the one fish that I think is the bigger fish out of that pod, in thinking that I could blow it up after catching the first fish.
Matt, I agree. I think if your goal is to catch the biggest fish in that pool, you don't want to try to pick off every single little 10 to 12 inch fish in that pool. Your best chance to catch that big fish may not be to fish for them, and you give them a little time to kind of start to feed and kind of start into a rhythm and, look for the biggest head. The one thing I'll add into that is the biggest head always seems to be near bankside structure.
I'll hear that. Yeah, especially for brown.
Nice.
What I hear us saying a lot about the Hendrickson is bigger trout. That's my experience too. Then for us next around here, we kind of have what we call an olive caddis. I'm sorry, I don't think any of us really know the Latin names for these. Do you? Am I wrong?
Nope.
Anyway, it's an olive caddis. It has an olive body. For me, I approach it very similarly as the grano. I'm going to move right through it. Unless you have an objection, I'm going to go to the sulfur.
Go for it.
Everybody loves a good sulfur hatch.
Yeah, right. Our biggest hatch around here. And people come from all over the world to fish, not just here, but many different, blue ribbon trout streams for a sulfur hatch. What's so special about it?
I think it's the quantity of bugs.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's
the size.
And it's
yeah.
and the fact that I think at that time of year the water temperatures are at an ideal level for the fish to feed. And so there's a lot of food in the system, and there's a lot of aggressive fish that have that ideal water temperature to feed.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. They're right there at the peak of the season. They're in such great abundance. I do find, especially early in the sulfur hatch, they'll be hatching kind of all day long. There's a long emergence. And then, especially later in the sulfur season, let's say, of almost 5 weeks, maybe sometimes longer, that spinner fall becomes super predictable. And it's late in the evening. And that is some of the best and most exciting fishing for me of the year on dry flies.
I agree.
I think there's 2 different types of sulfurs that hatch.
Oh, yeah. At least 2.
We always call them the big sulfurs and the small sulfurs. And so
there you go.
Nice.
And that's all.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Big ones and little ones. Just match the
big
size.
ones and little ones. The big ones, you can get the dumb fish to eat a 10. The big ones, most times they're around a 14 or a 12. But like you're saying, the big sulfurs will start early in the day, and man, that's the ticket if you can hit that hatch.
I know. And the nymphing is fantastic often too, during that time. There's just a lot going on. A lot of these hatches overlap, and we recognize that too.
Now, as far as flies, do you guys have specific flies for the sulfur hatch what do you guys like?
I love the compare-done pattern. I know you guys have mentioned it, but I do like that pattern a lot. So for sulfurs, I have it anywhere from 16 to... I think 16 and 14 are probably the most common sizes I fish it, but I fish that a lot. I do fish a parachute sulfur at times, but and if I've tied up a few clink hammers at times and fished them, but I just have tied a lot more of the compare-dones, so I fish them a lot more frequently.
Yeah.
I feel like the sulfurs are the one specific hatch that I have multiple nymphs that imitate them because they hatch for a long time. The fish seem to be interested in them. So, like, my favorites would be like a Polish woven fly that is like a dark over a light color, because if you pick up the nymphs, that's what they look like. Or like a pheasant tail with like an orange or a yellow hot spot.
Yeah.
I have like I would call it like a nymph, unweighted nymph that's I use as an emerger, because I feel like there are times when the sulfurs hatch when it's pretty cold out at times in our area, and so they'll get stuck in that mid-water column, and so that kind of unweighted nymph, about 6 to 8 inches into the film, it can be money some days.
I've actually used the SOS nymph kind of platform and tied it in a lot of colors that match our and sizes that match kind of our different bugs, and I love that just structure and the shape and kind of the thin body with those kind of. And I'll trim the wings pretty short, oftentimes just for my drifts. But I love that nymph in my box. I've got it in a bunch of different sizes and colors.
Yeah, that's nice. I think as the sulfur hatch goes on, because they've seen it for so long, they start to really key on those sulfurs. And like you, Bill, I'll have specific patterns that really do. It's one of the only flies that I really do have multiple, very specific patterns for them. And I do think it's because they see them for so long. And so that's underneath. I have, kind of a dark sulfur nymph and even a light sulfur nymph. I don't use it that much anymore. And then up top, I definitely have some lighter colored things. My go-to is like a Parachute Adams or an olive clink hammer, and that's across all these hatches we've already mentioned. I don't care if it's a mayfly or a caddis. Both those, I use both of them, and the fish eat them. Also, I already mentioned the CDC and Alka use that a lot. But as soon as those sulfurs roll around, I start to use comparadons that look as close to a sulfur as I can get. Some of them even with the orange egg sac on the back. You know, you've seen that, the comparadon. And we should mention too, a lot of this has to do with what water type you're fishing. If you're fishing real slow water, let's admit the trout are going to be much more discriminating and perhaps very picky.
Oh yeah,
especially toward the end of the hatch about your fly.
Good point.
Hey, what about stone flies? You fish stones on top much?
Bill probably does.
So I've tried to fish, like I've seen them hatch and I've watched them hatch. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to fish like a size 6 dry fly, like, you know, your typical like Western style dry fly in this area.
Yeah. Right.
I have not had any success on it.
I think some of our, I don't know, golden stonefly falls into this for me, but there are certain larger bugs that we have here that hatch in smaller quantities that I find that you can occasionally goad the kind of willing larger or maybe kind of mid to larger size trout into going after, even when there's not an active hatch. And so during the summertime or even during the late spring, I'll use, if I'm going to fish dry dropper and there's not any active hatch, sometimes as my dry fly, I will use one of those rough patterns. Like I'll use a stimulator kind of mimicking a golden stonefly, or I'll use something that mimics one of our larger drakes,
right on,
in the area. And I get success on top, like I'll, in the absence of a hatch, right? Yeah. I'll have the occasional fish just crush that top fly. And I don't know whether they really truly think it's a golden stonefly or they truly think it's a gray fox or a slate drake or something like that. But at least there is some success to be found there. I just don't find it in the midst of a hatch.
That's the thing for me. I think with the stones around here, when I tie a dry fly stone on of 10 or even a 12, but especially you go like to an 8, I feel like I'm hoping. And it's something special very well might happen. But we have to recognize too, so the stoneflies don't emerge. Well, they crawl onto rocks or they crawl onto, logs, stream side logs or logs that are right in the stream. They need to crawl up on something to emerge. Yeah. They crawl, they go up the tree limb or the rock face a little bit and they break out of that shuck. So they don't do what mayflies and caddis do, And let's move on from the stonefly. And really next around here, we get a tan caddis that just lasts it seems forever. That tan caddis goes all the way really into November. Yeah. And I acknowledge there are many, many species, I'm sure, of this tan caddis and even some different sizes. However, that tan caddis, let's talk about what a caddis does when it emerges. As I understand it, we've all read it, it builds an air bubble around itself to help propel itself up through the water column pretty fast. And by the time it gets to the top, it's dry. It doesn't need to sit on the top, like we say, a sailboat, like a mayfly does, and dry its wings and hope nothing eats it. It just kind of boom, right up through the surface. And you can often see this. If you have enough bugs, you just stare at the water. You'll just see bugs just sort of boom, popping out. Anyway, that's what we have for our caddis, sort of smashed in there with the sulfurs and the stoneflies and before the March brown and all that stuff. They're there. It emerges differently than that stonefly. It definitely emerges way differently than the mayfly.
I feel like caddis, you can often, like the mayflies, you're often wanting to have that dead drift where any type of caddis pattern, there are days where you can throw that caddis and dead drift it and they won't touch it. But if you throw that caddis out there and you swing it or you skate it across the top of the water, that can be a huge trigger at times.
You brought that up earlier, Bill. The word kind of stuck out in my mind is like erratic. The caddis will do faster and more unusual things than a mayfly. They're less predictable. And so you can get away with more. They're perhaps more forgiving to fish.
I'm going to make a monorig plug here because I think fishing the monorig with the dry dropper kind of style is can be a really fun way to fish caddis.
Right.
In a way that you can have control over that dapping motion or that kind of dancing on the surface motion. And so that is a really fun style and the monorig really sets you up.
You're going there, what we call tight line dry dropper.
You got
so
it.
you're
Tight
essentially
line to the dry dropper.
right, rod tip to dry fly, no line on the water, tight to the dry. You can, like you said, you can hop it.
You can dance it, and
Then you have
walk it through
a nymph underneath. Yep.
You got it. And usually I'll have like a holy grail or some hackled kind of pattern underneath. But that's a fun tandem to fish.
It is. I love it. Like we said, a tan cat, it's just, it just keeps going. I'm like, all the way through the summer. For me, I feel like I could go out any morning in July and August and catch a fish or maybe a bunch of fish at 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30 on a tan caddis. You know, on most of our rivers, given average conditions. I love.
Dom, what size is that bug by that time of year?
I'm going to say 16 if I had to round it off. Sometimes a 14, sometimes an 18. But I think that's what we're all kind of saying here, as I understand it. Most of you are really kind of are generalists. You don't care what the Latin name is, and you don't even necessarily care about the small intricacies of it. What color is it generally, but especially what size is it? If you're talking on top, underneath too, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I think the general rule is every hatch, whether it's from the blueing olive clear down to the green drake, whenever they're hatching, they start big and they end small.
That's a good point. You mean if the hatch goes on and on, and there are different species of it.
There'll be different iterations of it, or even like, week one, maybe the bluing olive comes out as a 16, and then, the next, 2 weeks later, they're coming out as 18s. And then by the time that hatch finishes and it's done with that evolution, you're down to a 20, and then, bluing olives are now done, at least for that season.
That's fair. That's definitely what happens with the sulfurs, and it's definitely what happens with that tan caddis. Hey, so what about the March browns? I think March brown is besides the olive, right? It's hard to pick a favorite. But I just love the March brown. They trickle off all day. Some of our favorite streams. You can fish a 10 or a 12. It's one of the only like traditional catskill patterns that I still fish. And I just love how it kind of just rolls and bounces on the water. And I feel like it brings, kind of like the Hendrickson, it'll bring some of the bigger heads to the surface.
Dom, you hit a couple good points there where you can fish a bigger fly more consistently. Bill, you mentioned maybe it starts big and tapers off, but to me the March brown, the size consistency on the larger average is pretty strong throughout the life of the hatch, which is just a fun change up to fish with. And I think part of the March brown is also sometimes like underlooked, or maybe by the time we get into hatch season, we get used to dry flies coming up. We're like, March browns, it's the next hatch. But to me, I feel like it's so underrated.
Yes.
And we talked a little bit on like gloomy or rainy days. I have a great memory with Greg Hoover a number of years back when we were on the water, and it was overcast and misting and a slight drizzle all day long. And those mayflies were trying to emerge, and they get stuck. They have those big wings, a larger fly. It takes them longer to dry out those things on their wings. And, it's just a day of nonstop rising and nonstop catching and releasing of fish. It's just such a lovely hatch to me.
I think we're thinking about the same river.
Yeah, I'm sure we are.
It's special on that river. Yeah.
If you hit it right, oh man, it's like you're getting away with something.
Yep.
Yeah. See, I have the opposite feeling about the
of course really?
March brown.
Well, that's Bill.
Don't take that away from me.
What don't you like about the March brown, Bill?
For the longest time when I first started fishing, I was like, those things must taste like garbage because I never see a fish eat it on top.
Oh my word.
I liked what you said, Dom, about like trickling in throughout the day. It's because that's one of the flies that you can maybe having like a real poor day of fishing, and then all of a sudden you've got something really special on your hands out of nowhere at like 2 p.m.
It's one of the only, especially big flies that I will just feel confident I can just prospect. I don't even see any risers. I'm just going to prospect with the dry for the next 2 hours, and I'll probably catch 5 or 6 pretty good looking fish too. Pretty sizable.
I'm like
fish.
you too. I like the catskill style for that fly too. What is it about it?
I don't know. I'm sure. I think it's a Humphreys thing for me. Maybe Greg Hoover told you to do that.
Is it that maybe that it looks a little bit more like like it's crippled a little bit more?
I don't know. I feel like it rolls.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is with a bigger fly like that, if you can make something look a little bit more crippled because of what you were describing, Austin, That makes sense.
Mhm.
And the Catskill does that really well.
That's a good point. Sure.
Now, I've tried like parachute styles, and I've even tried really big puffies during the March Brown. And a puffy is really just dubbing on a hook and CDC wrapped at the head. And it just sits in there. And if anything's going to look like a cripple, to me, that's what a puffy looks like. Like, oh my, I'm just stuck in a film and I just got legs and wings, just kind of in the film. To me, that Catskill style that we're talking about, it sits there like it's just ready to take off, and not necessarily that it's even all that available to the trout. They just seem to get excited.
Yeah.
I think they get excited about the size.
I think so too.
You guys, you're fortunate out there. You rambled off all the different mayfly species that have hatched up until the end of May. And out here, that March Brown is one of the, we have our olives. We have our giant Mother's Day caddis. It's the same thing as the granum. But then we're kind of left with that March Brown as being the key, like the major mayfly hatch for the month of May. Nice. We just don't get a ton of mayflies out here. So that's one of my favorite hatches. And it's actually a size smaller than the bugs back home. You tie it a size smaller, similar dubbing, but that can really get the fish pumping on mayflies out here before runoff hits.
Awesome.
That's neat. That's one of the things to talk about. And when we get to the end here, I really want you to talk about, things that we've definitely missed, talking from our Eastern perspective, and you have both. It's the interesting point there that all your stuff kind of happens later,
We're just getting olives right now.
Really? Yeah.
Yep.
And so we've had them for 5 to 6 weeks, and we're kind of, I'm not going to say done, because, our olives can really go all the way through the season.
Sure.
But the major hatch of the olive is about to be taken over by the granome.
Yeah.
So after the March Brown around here, we have a gray fox. I'm going to skip over it. I mean, if I see it, I match it, with the size. Anybody else?
It's nothing different.
It's not like that's good. And it's not like we ignore these bugs.
It's like, I want to disagree, but I can't.
And we're looking for them, and we're ready to match them, and not just on top, but underneath, and recognize that they're there, and the trout are probably eating them and try to adapt. Anyway, our next major thing that happens is the green drake. And for here, people will come from all over the world to fish some of the green drake hatches on a couple of our favorite streams. What do you think about the green drake, guys?
It's fun.
It's overhyped.
Yeah, well, that's part of the thing. Is I think the misconception is that no matter what, when you come to fish the green drake hatch, you're going to get to tie on these -2 size flies for big mouth trout. And
-2.
Yeah, well, that's just
Imaginary
not always
numbers.
the case, Like we've always it's awesome when you get into that and you have these huge flies coming off and trout are rising to them. That's so fun. But a lot of the time, if you tie on something like 10, 12 maybe, you have a little bit more success usually.
Well, and also the fish are really so imprinted with the sulfurs still that they're preferentiating eating
that's a good point.
those, and both underneath and on top, in the midst of either large coffin flies just sitting to be eaten, or whether they it's just kind of fascinating to me that they can leave such available protein and go for still the sulfurs, or even other bugs. But it just goes to show you here in this region and in this part of the country how wealthy we are with bugs. And that's where this kind of the whole conversation around hatches for us, as we're all talking about it, is it can be maddening if you try to focus in on it so much, because the trout are going to tell you kind of what they want to eat,
what they want to eat
given day.
It reminds me of earlier I said about the cicadas. It's like they have to see something that big for a little while before they go, all right, I guess we'll eat it. I guess that's food.
I'm sure someone else has eaten this by now, and they haven't died.
And yet the green drake really only hatches in one part of the stream for, you say, a week, maybe 10 days at the most. So for us, again, these green drakes on a couple of our favorite streams, they will trickle off all day. And you can kind of fish them like a March Brown, hoping trout will. It's just not as reliable as that March Brown prospecting. And then what we're really looking for is like what Trevor said, that coffin fly, which is the green drake spinner, right? And boy, I wish it happened before dusk, but it doesn't. If you're lucky, that spinner fall will happen while you can still see things. Usually not. Usually it's after real dark. Most people go home. But if you want to stay out there and just kind of listen for the slurps, if you're in that kind of water, it's a lot of fun.
Dom, having said that, that's one of the things that I miss the most about back east is I can't tell you how many, if you've never sat at dark on some of those limestoners and fish spinners until 11:30 or midnight, you're really missing out on an epic experience. I mean, it's
go late.
You can, it is so fun. I mean, I used to camp up there for, 10 days every May, and I spent a ton of time chasing that hatch. And you had mentioned that it's unlike the March Brown, and I agree. I think 1 out of 10 years we hit an emergence from the adults during the day, and it was as good of dry fly fishing as I had on that river ever. Right. But it wasn't consistent. But when you got into that spinner fall, I mean, you don't even know how you're catching fish sometimes. Right. I mean, you're just throwing it out there at those rise forms, and you can barely make them out, and you catch fish. I mean, it's a hoot doing it like that out there.
You ever use the glow in the dark spinner from Jonas Price has them over at the Feather Door?
No, we never did, man. We get lucky.
Pretty good idea.
You try to look at those flat pools and look for those, and you'd be surprised at what you see once you're, I mean, I don't have to tell you guys night fish all the time, but you can see pretty good out there at times.
No, you can.
You get the light in the right place and you can really.
Right. Us night fishermen, we're good. I'll go in at dusk. Most people are seriously kind of coming out like, well, the spinners didn't fall in time. Nah, you go in.
Not yet.
Night fishermen are ready for that. And honest to God, some of my best night fishing nights have happened around that green drake time and sometimes just after.
Mm-hmm. You think it's just because they're looking up earlier than later?
Exactly. I do. I think it kind of gets them conditioned to like, you know what, there's some big bugs around here. For me, green drakes kick off the night fishing season.
Kicks off the real success.
There you go.
Hard to be successful before that.
We night fish all year. We just night catch in the summer.
There you go. Thank you, green drakes.
There you go. The Western green drake, the one thing it doesn't have, it hatches a lot later. It's a lot smaller, and it doesn't have that. I'm not 100% sure, but you don't hear about the coffin fly out here.
Really?
You don't hear about that big spinner. It's not a sought after thing. The hatch is, but there's no real talk about a spinner fall.
Huh.
Is that because the bear will eat you if you stay out after dark?
That's why.
You're always taking that chance.
One of the big things about the green drake hatch, I think, is that just they start to see, it's kind of the start of seeing more larger things happening underwater. And so I've found that when the green drakes start, things that aren't even mayflies start to work really well. Like stoneflies start to work really, really well right around green drakes. I mean, they work beforehand too, but I'll see like when green drakes really get going, trout really key in on bigger stoneflies than normal. And I think it's just because they're seeing larger things happening in the water around them.
That's a good point to reiterate. We're talking as if it goes from March Brown to green drake and whatever, and to tan caddis before. No. There's so much overlap here. And again, it's not really our goal tonight to educate everyone about, the hatch charts. Go find the hatch charts and then talk to people that are in the know, I suppose, in your area. You're going to find out about the specifics of your area. Hey, for us though, after the green drake, we have a brown drake. It's there, It's not a big deal necessarily for us. Hey, brown drake,
Hey, guy, we like you.
And we have a light Cahill. Now that's often I'll be like, hey, what's that leftover sulfur doing?
That sulfur?
It's a big sulfur. It's a
little different color.
I know, exactly. I'm like, wait, it's like July, it's August. Well, what's up with that big sulfur? Nah, it's a light Cahill, I suppose.
I suppose.
We fish them. For me, I'm going to, honestly, like I don't carry specific flies for them. I kind of get my sulfurs back out, and they are some of my bigger sulfurs. Also, I mean, on that same river we were just talking about, I find like number 20s sometimes, and I'm going to call them like Cahills. They're not like white mayflies, not the big ones. Yeah. They're tiny. Anyway, you got we're prepared for all of that with really our general patterns. And I want to bring this up after the green drake. And a lot of people put the fly rods away. Seriously, a lot of our locals here are like, okay, that bug season is over. Well, We just said you kind of got the brown drake and Lake Cahill. Obviously, that tan caddis just keeps going. But for me, my favorite dry fly season is terrestrials.
Splat.
I mean, I love just prospecting with a parachute ant all day long. It's when
fun.
summertime, late June, especially early July, all the way into, I'm going to say early October, is when I fish dry flies just the most. Some days just continuously, not even throwing a nymph on. How do you guys feel about like terrestrial season? I love it.
I'll say it's my favorite to fish with a mono rig.
Really?
And that's just because it's really fun to, like, if you can just get a little bit of a tuck cast and kind of hit that fly pretty hard on the water, it's really fun to just follow that up immediately and keep all of your line off the water.
On a dry?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Getting super close.
Yeah, just give it that splat.
Pretty close, like 30 feet at the most, right?
Yeah.
Like tenkara on a fly rod.
That's right.
Seriously.
That's the time of year when I will often just go out with fly line, because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna.
Me too.
Interesting. Opposite.
Yeah, because I'm like, okay, there's a good chance that I'll fish terrestrials, and I'll just go find a big pool, and I'll just methodically, slowly work my way through that pool and throw ants and beetles and green weenies and just work it slow. And there's just something fun about often the water's really low and clear, and so just watching that ant or beetle hit the water, you see that dark shadow dart out from the bank and just eat it. It's just it's addicting.
It's the same here, Bill. It's almost like, so in the wintertime, we acknowledge there's very, very few dry fly opportunities, and we're nymphing and we're getting low, like Trevor said much earlier. In the summer, it's like the polar opposite, man. I'll often do what you said, Bill, just fly line. For me, it's a George Harvey leader, and sometimes I don't do any nymphing for weeks at a time because I just love that opportunity to believe that every cast that I'm just prospecting good-looking areas, water's low, water's clear, like you said. I love it. And for me, it's a parachute ant. You could pick your beetle or ant, whatever works for you, and your area, whatever they're seeing the most.
Yeah, we'll chime in with the, out here, the terrestrial thing's obviously a big thing. And you add in the, we have cinnamon ants and we have beetles, but the hoppers are what really fires people up out here,
right?
And creates 6 weeks of really good fishing, usually starting sometime in mid-August. And, and it's just like any hatch. I mean, it starts off big, the Keller formations usually, it can go from green to tan, and that is one particular hatch that I've dealt with where I, believe it or not, of all things, they get specific on body Keller. You can maybe start the season with the general pattern, but if you really want to get into fish, you got to be dialed in with the size and the Keller that those hoppers are, if you want to consistently catch fish out here in the summer, especially out of a drift boat.
That's something I'm jealous of, is those hoppers. Yeah. We just don't have them here. We don't have enough. I've fished plenty of hoppers wishing that they would respond like that.
I remember being out there with you, Matt, and we were fishing and throwing the hoppers, and it was just something different and cool. And I remember the one day you're like, oh, we got to go downriver, 10 miles next float. My buddy said they're cutting fields and they're pushing hoppers into the river, which, like, you wouldn't think of that, and that's a really cool, like, aspect we just don't have around here.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the farmers cut, and those hoppers just go barreling into the creek when that hay comes off. And if you can time things right, I mean, it's crazy. The action can just be crazy. I outside of like a cicada,
right,
salmon fly, there's something about that hopper eat and that is just like vicious and angry, and it's addicting for sure.
So Matt, you brought up the salmon fly. It's something I want to touch on because it's another thing. Like hoppers, we obviously don't have salmon flies out here. When does that happen? How is that different than the hopper? Is it super similar? What? Tell us about that.
So the salmon fly starts in this area around mid-May, and you can fish it effectively all the way until the second week in July if you know where to go. So the hatch kind of water temperature is so important here. Not all the streams are, the same water temperature at the same time, because you got varying levels of elevation. You have tailwaters, you have valley streams. So that hatch happens, at different times all over the place. But I've been fortunate to experience the cicada hatch in PA, and it's like that. I mean, you get it every year.
That's why I'm jealous, man.
Yeah, and it is, and it's exciting, and it's gonna pop, and you can just blind cast that thing and cover as much water as you want in the banks, in the middle of the river. It doesn't matter. I mean, you can just fish it, and I try to fish as much as I can, and there's a reason it's as popular as it is, because when you get it and you hit it right, you want more. And we're lucky to be able to have it the next year. It's going to hatch. And some years, it burns up river quicker than others. But if you get good water and good temps, you can have a heck of a week out on the river. And my brother still plans his trip every year around it, ever since I moved out. So
yeah, why not? Right? That's sweet. I do wish we had that. Hey, so we got the terrestrials, right? We said that, and then for us, we have kind of two more summer hatches, let's say, and a slate drake. We should address that.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I like that slate drake.
I know. Yeah,
that's one of my.
You probably fish it with a comparadon on top, don't you?
So if you haven't,
he does.
If you haven't figured out my pattern yet, I fish a comparadon in size like 20 to size 8, maybe 6.
Yep.
And it just depends.
Size 8 is bushy too.
I know. I think we'll float some championship.
It's a champion floater.
It is.
That's true. Bill is the only person that I know that uses a comparadon as a dry dropper dry.
Yeah,
it is.
I mean, it doesn't really have great
puts enough
buoyancy,
air in that thing.
But heck, if you time like Bill does, in the sizes that he does, and it works, you just can't argue with it. Go ahead.
We
about the slate drake.
Yeah, the slate drake. I think, what was it, last summer I fished with Trevor and Austin, and I was, and there were some bugs hatching, so I was like, I caught fish on nymphing in the morning, and so I went to the size 8 comparadon, and I fished it, and I caught fish on it that evening, and we got back to the store, and everyone else, or not to the store, but to the parking lot, and everyone was just like talking about like, oh, it was a tough night. I'm like, right. And I said, I fished the size 8 comparadon. They were eating it well, and everyone just like looked at me in the parking lot like, this guy's full of crap. But like, that's what I fished, and that's what I caught fish on.
There it is.
So what about that nymph? It's one of the only patterns that I ever tied like completely different, specifically. Like, there was a point where we were trying articulated patterns, because of how that swam.
It's kind of big too.
Swung it, to mimic, and maybe even a little marabou. I mean, you don't see a ton of just classic nymphs with marabou to imitate that. But Bill, on one of our waters, we like to fish back in Western PA. That's a prominent hatch, and it was fun to try to match that with different nymphs.
It's almost like, you've got a nymph / like something that looks like a minnow swimming through the water, and so a lot of times they wouldn't eat the dead drift. They would more frequently eat something on a swing, or like if you would like twitch it, like, you're in the middle of your drift and you would twitch the fly and put some animation in either the fly or the dropper of that dry fly, it would be the trigger to get them to eat a lot of times,
especially in skinny water, because that's where they do emerge. And here you are in some of the lowest water conditions of the year. And some of the biggest bugs are emerging in some of the skinniest water, and it's unusual because everything else around is pretty small. Even the Caddis by that point are 16s and 18s. Those tan Caddis, it'll keep going. And here come the Tricos, sometimes, absolutely, coinciding. And they're tiny. We'll talk about those in a minute. And I just think the fish get excited about it. It's a bigger food form. It is very predictable. And you'll see them. You'll see those little shucks on the rocks.
Yeah.
And you go, ooh, it's ISO time.
And that's a good spinner fall too.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
It's a really good spinner fall.
It often seems, in good spinner fall, I think the fisherman means condensed. Kind of, all the spinners fall
and
at
predictable.
once. And there you go. And that's what makes it predictable. And it can be day after day. Usually you think it's right at dusk for you? I mean, is that what you see? Yeah. So day after day, it'll often be right at dusk, and here all the isonichias is what we're saying, that came off during the day. All of them are like, oh, let's all mate and then just fall right before dusk. Fantastic. Thank you.
So a lot of the mayflies around here are like specific time windows where it's like, okay, sulfurs are hatching the last hour of the day or the last 30 minutes of light, where I feel like the Isonychia or slate drake is a slow burn throughout the day. And so the fish are just constantly used to see them. So they're one of my favorite exploratory patterns if I just want to throw that ISO dry throughout the day, because they'll slowly see it.
Bill, just to wrap that up, that very much matches your strategy for how we've acknowledged that you like to fish, and some of us do too, to cover a lot of water. And so if you're prospecting, 1 or 2 casts in a great spot, okay, I don't find any hungry ones for slate drakes. Next spot, covering water. And when you're prospecting, and again, we're saying not to fish into risers, but just throwing it into likely water, prospecting, that's the thing you got to do. You just got to keep covering water. It won't work if you're just trying to, hit the same undercut bank for a half hour. Nope.
Good point.
Go on. Move on.
One other interesting piece before we move on from that hatch is it's the only spinner fall I've found where not a traditional rusty spinner body covers the spinner. I usually tie a purple body, purple hue body that really imitates that spinner fall. So if you get bored, Dell, and want to throw in some new spinners, try the purple body one.
I've got some purple body wet flies for that purpose that have fished well.
Nice.
Sometimes, I said in the intro, being super specific on the pattern is not all that important. And yet, what you guys are talking about right there, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, like 2 or 3, maybe 4, probably at the most 5 times a year, I'll find like, oh my, that was it. It was the pattern. It was that very specific purple body that really turned them on. You kind of got to love those moments.
You do.
In a way, you have to hate those moments because you go, man, now I got to
tie
carry
a dozen of those now.
I wish it wasn't that way.
Right.
Because then you're always wondering.
You got to love it. Hey, sort of the next major thing that happens is the Tricos, right? I'm pretty sure we will do a full podcast on the Tricos. I love Trico fishing. We should get Greg Hoover on, Austin, to talk about, right?
Yeah, we should.
Tricos. But sort of briefly, how's it change your fishing, guys? So how do you approach the Trico hatch?
I hate my life.
Because the tiny little buggers.
Oh, I hate those little guys. I tie the flies, 22s, 24s. The older I get, the more I tie the 18s. It's like a double Trico.
Oh, double Trico. That's cheating, man.
And hey, got to do what you got to do. Yeah. But I tell you, it is predictable, and it is first thing in the morning, right when you get to the river. And so often, in the summer months. And so
what you're looking for is the spinner fall.
Yeah,
you should say,
exactly.
Right? Not the dun. Supposedly, the dun emerges at night, and we can't see it. And when you get there, like you said, a lot of times it's first light. Sometimes it'll be as late as 10 or 11. The water temperature, the air temperature, I think, is 72, 74. I think that's what George Harvey wrote about.
There's a certain air temperature where the spinners will fall, and some days they don't, and some days they do.
Do you guys get specific on the body on that spinner? What do you do, black or white?
Both, and sometimes green.
Yep.
It's such a tiny little thing. You're like, it can't really matter. No, it seems to. Again, though, I'm fishing softer water at that point. If they're getting real picky on the color, I'm not fishing it in the heavier water, and they're not coming up for the spinners and that kind of stuff anyway. It is, for me, the most technical dry fly fishing that I get to do all year. I kind of love it, and like you say, you kind of hate it. You get so many refusals. They come up to your size 24, 26, and they go, nah, I'm not going to eat it. They'll give it a good look and just knows that, I'm going to turn down. And as that Trico hatch goes on, sometimes clear into October, that's late, but they just get more and more picky about it.
It's prevalent out here too. I mean, it starts happening around July on a lot of the creeks out here, late July. On some of the famous tailwaters, they get prolific hatches. I mean, people come out to experience that. And it's similar, tactics similar. There's definitely a following on that hatch, and I can see how people get addicted to it.
Yeah, for sure. And some of the best dry fly fishermen I know are, as you said, addicted to that trico hatch. They look forward to it. It is predictable. It's almost day after day. You're looking for that spinner fall, probably within 20 minutes of where it was yesterday. It is. I mean, it's challenging. It's fun. I wouldn't want to start out with it. I wouldn't recommend a dry fly angler says, fish tricos.
Intro to fly fishing is not trico hatches.
No, it's really not. And so you accept that challenge eventually and you go, ooh, this is tough. I like it. Hey, let's move through it here. And for me, the trico really kind of signals some kind of conclusion to these major hatches that happen. Now, obviously, throughout the fall, really the next one in our area that happens is a big white mayfly. It's 10, size 12 maybe.
Yeah.
Often those, I've had better fishing with the white mayfly on smallmouth bass rivers. I don't know why, but it's the bigger freestone rivers that are too warm to hold a lot of wild trout. These fall caddis, boy, you can say October caddis and put all kind of names to them. For me, my caddis strategy, which we've kind of talked about, doesn't really change. And I'm going to encounter that tan caddis. Like I said, it'll go all the way through October. When I find the caddis, I'm ready. I'm good. And my strategy doesn't change. What about you guys? You find anything special throughout the fall with the caddis? Or
as far as like the white mayflies, I've occasionally hit them. I feel like they're a lot of times, I'm scared of the dark. So a lot of times they hatch after dark, and that's more you guys' speed. Where, I'm more the tan caddis guy that wake up early in the morning and get it at like 7 a.m.
I've fished the nighttime white fly a few times.
Really? Nice.
Yeah, on a local river. And I've had some success with it, but I don't know. It was very different than what I'm used to when I fish at night. So I wasn't super confident. I think I just like fishing at nighttime. I'd want to know the sections that I'm fishing a little bit better than I did when I fished it. But it was fun to try something different. I used it was like a Royal Wolf, but just a white one.
So you're fishing the dun, not a spinner.
Yeah.
Right. Gotcha.
And it was just something that was visible enough that I could pick it out.
They should be more forgiving then on that dun. Then,
I think
the
so.
spinners like dead drift, pure dead drift. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You can maybe even throw wets like that. A bigger wet. Bigger, whatever, size 8 or 10 wet.
Yep.
Even swinging through. That should be a good night strategy. Hey, we got to do another night fishing podcast.
I know you. I'm just getting excited thinking about it.
Bill's not invited. He's afraid.
Yeah.
Afraid of the dark.
I'm an early man.
And then Matt's not invited because he has grizzly bears out there.
So come on. Give me a break.
That's right. We have coyotes.
It's near coyotes, wolves.
Coyotes.
They'll eat you alive. You got to watch the coyotes.
Mountain lions.
You said that the Trico hatch kind of signifies the end of major hatch season back there, and I would say that the end of the hopper season out here is kind of when the first frost hits, and things kind of transition. And as far as the caddis and the strategies, we still have caddis that happen out here, and a lot of times I'll find myself going into the park, into Yellowstone, and a lot of folks like to chase the lake fish that enter the system up from Hebgen Lake or Shoshone Lake, and they don't, they're not feeding like a normal freestone fish, right? They're lake fish. They have different tendencies, and so I tend to go to the streams that may not have lake fish, and I'll hit with the white miller caddis, and that's a one caddis I had to learn out here that we don't get back east, and it's actually kind of a newer species. You can read all about it. It's super interesting. It's a newer caddis species, but a lot less pressure. Anyway, those fish tend to really key in on that white miller in the fall out here, and you can have some good days prospecting with just like a white elk hair caddis, and that can be super fun. Kind of revitalize your dry fly fishing after it's kind of gone dormant toward the end of the grasshoppers. It kind of kicks back in with that white miller.
Is that different than your spruce moth, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that spruce moth tends to happen sometime late July, early September, and that's kind of heavy pine forest streams where lodge poles line the banks. But boy, that's a what a weird, that's like a weird hatch, right? One of a specific area hatch, but really, really fun. And fish tend to go nuts for that as well. But it's similar. That tie's similar. The white miller and the spruce moth.
Neat. So I said earlier that, the olive for us really kicks things off and it kind of winds things down. The olive will go clear into November. Even early December, I've seen decent olive hatches. And like we said, it'll get smaller as the year goes on. The one thing we really haven't talked about, let's just do one more thing about midges. And I said that Tricos can be some of the most challenging dry fly fishing experiences of the year, but so can midges. You see fish rise and you go, oh no, they're eating a midge up top. And so for me, I really focus on those midges in the winter, but man, we acknowledge those midges can happen throughout all of the other hatches that we talked about. You could be thinking, oh, they're coming up for sulfurs. Nope. It's actually a midge that most of those fish are coming up for. Anything you guys do, you want to talk about when you're sure that they're eating midges, whether that's on top or underneath?
I put a Griffiths net on and try to catch them.
Same.
That's like my only pattern that I carry for midges.
I know.
At least the dry fly.
I second that.
Griffiths dusted up top of it.
Yep.
I'll third that.
Nobody wants to deal with midges.
No, I'll take the cluster.
Dude, I'll take a midge. I'll take a midge all day. And I think I alluded to this earlier, but in the winter, I can go to the stream with the Griffiths net tied to my leader, and that's all I have to fish all day to rising fish. I mean,
that's
it's
cool.
In the dead of winter. I mean, 15 degrees out, one of my favorite times a year. And I will say I would much rather fish that than the pseudo Cleons, which are the annoying BWOs in the fall that are like size 26s. Yeah. They're very prominent out here.
Yeah, they shouldn't count as
but I hate them. I hate them.
They're midges.
But the fish crush them.
Right.
Yeah, the fish crush them, but you can't. I mean, it's so hard to imitate them. It's brutal. That hatch, I hate that hatch.
And I've hit that hatch on some big, eastern tailwaters, and the fish were just, you're fishing 22s. And the fish are all sitting in tail outs of 6 to 10 inches of water, and you're trying not to spook them. And then, So as far as presentation, when you're presenting the fly to the fish, how are you doing that in most hatches? And does it matter?
You mean across all the hatches that we've talked about?
Yeah, I guess I have mayflies. I kind of have one strategy, and Caddis I have a different, meaning
And you mean on top?
Yes, on top. So on top, most mayflies or midges, most times I find myself presenting the fly in a downstream method than where I'm standing. Where Caddis, a lot of times, I'm fishing upstream.
Yeah, I mean,
I fish everything upstream.
Yeah, I would agree with Dom.
I do. I try to get dead drifts on everything, and then I will, sometimes I'll mend to hop a Caddis. That's about the only kind of variation I'll do. And now when I'm fishing underneath, I find that I'll be trying to get dead drifts, especially with mayfly imitations underneath, when that's going on across all these hatches we've talked about. And then when Caddis are hatching, and literally hatching, I could see them in the air, then that's really the time when I will most go ahead and swing my nymphs up, let them, lysing ring lift, whatever you want to call it, everything's swinging out, maybe even crossing current seams. Yeah, because we've acknowledged the Caddis are kind of the most athletic of the insects, and they will do unpredictable things. That's about, those are my strategies.
Those sound good. I'll add in one more. I mean, for terrestrial fishing, I tend to do a plop, really trigger
good point.
Bank stuff, right? I mean, that's one of those times a year where you kind of change it up a little bit, where I'm looking for a ferocious, plump, because those fish, especially out here with the hoppers, they react to that plop, and that's kind of a cool thing to throw or to change it up from all the Caddis fishing you've been doing and the mayfly fishing you've been doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll do both on an ant. Some days, I said I love my parachute ant. I think it looks like a beetle too, the way I tie it. Fair enough. I can plop it with a certain type of cast, and I can just lay it down nice and easy and a nice soft fall. Some days they're on that plop. Some fish over there on that right side bank are on a plop, and the fish on the left side bank is maybe he wants it more. Just kind of gliding down. It's certainly not the same. And so that's kind of what we've talked about here. Is it's really nice to have your perspective there, Matt. You're seeing different things than we do. All that midge opportunity that you have all the way through the winter, we don't necessarily have that. Not that predictable anyway. And yet we have some of the bigger mayflies and more mayfly species than you do out there, Anything else, guys?
I just think, listening to the introduction and then our discussion, I think it's kind of funny to hear a little bit of the dichotomy between our statements about like, hey, it doesn't really matter knowing the specifics about these bugs. And then we all like talk about some of the specifics of these bugs, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just kind of what neither is right and neither is wrong in what we're saying. What we're just kind of pointing out is that with certain bugs, it does seem to matter. With certain ones, it doesn't. And sort of, it's really easy to get lost in the weeds if you want to on Latin names of mayflies and the specific number of bands on the leg of this particular mayfly.
Yeah.
And yet only some things matter to our trout. And I think wherever you live, finding out what things matter and what things don't is kind of the key to having fun fishing hatches. And if it's not fun, you shouldn't be doing it. And for all of us, I think we find that it's fun to think outside the box a little bit, to take a little bit more of a broad and overarching approach rather than knocking our heads against the wall trying to be too specific. But I just kind of enjoyed that play throughout the night as we talked about different aspects of this.
Brought me back to just how much fun I had when I first started out fly fishing, trying to learn all this, right? I mean, it's so extensive from the beginning of the hatch season to the end, and the different sizes, and instead of trying, to make it overcomplicated, why not embrace it? And when you're out there, learn as much as you can, because every year you can get back to the bench and try to match the hatch. I mean, that's all part of what fly fishing's all about. So have fun with it.
Absolutely.
Good call.
Yeah.
The knowledge isn't going to hurt you.
No.
You don't have to obsess over it.
Yeah.
But it's not going to hurt you to understand what a slate drake nymph does when it emerges, or anything else we talked about,
You got it. Yeah.
All right, there it is. Hatches and strategies. Thank you, as always, guys, for a great conversation. So, hey, I hope you listeners out there don't feel like we left you hanging. I mean, we just talked for an hour and a half, and we barely made a dent in this topic. But hopefully, this general overview gives you something to think about, a few things to look for on the water, and perhaps a few strategies for approaching the next hatch that you find on a river. The joy of having fly fishing in our life is the constant learning. And I know that in this conversation tonight, I learned a few more things from these guys. The education never ends. Again, one of fly fishing's most compelling attractions is also one of its deepest complexities. It's the bugs. Like so many others before me, I picked up a fly rod because I saw rising trout, and I just couldn't match what the fish were eating with my spinning rod. And that allure of understanding how to present those bugs and catch trout on what they eat most, both on top and underneath, has been with me ever since. It's a mystery. It's a wonderful pursuit, and it's one hell of a good rabbit hole to go down into. So I hope that what you've heard from us tonight is that chasing the hatches need not be daunting. You can approach things as generally or as specifically as you like, and both strategies can catch a pile of trout. But I will say that once you've seen an epic hatch at dusk, with rising trout all around and confidently eating the fly you selected, it's the kind of experience that draws you in for life. Thanks for listening, friends. Austin, will you read us out?
Yeah. So remember, troutbitten.com is a free resource for all anglers. With over 800 articles, there are stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and their tags too. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment, because it really does help us out. But until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
Splat.
Yeah, this is good stuff.
You guys are laughing. I had to stop.